Welcome to Westeros.org's bonus video for episode 9, Blackwater. What an amazing episode that was. Linda's going to be discussing some history that seems kind of relevant to this episode, and then I'll be back to discuss the highs and lows, and I can tell you there's not many lows for this one. Here we go.
For this week's background material on history, we thought we'd catch up with the song that we get in the episode, namely The Rains of Castamere, and see a little bit about the recent history of the Lannisters and of Lord Tywin in particular. To do that, we have to go back to Tywin's father. We've seen him mention him in the past, and saying that he was a weak man, and Lord Titus was actually the youngest child of his parents, and he was never expecting to become a lord, but his siblings died and he became the Lord of Casterly Rock, and he wasn't prepared for it, he wasn't cut out for it, and like some people say that younger siblings tend to be the type that want to please everyone, and Lord Titus wanted to please people. He was the richest and mightiest man in the Westlands, but he allowed his bannermen to push him around. He had a mistress that, at least according to Tywin, took advantage of him quite a bit. And this led Tywin to become quite bitter with how his father was handling things, and the fact that people would, laugh at his father. And if there's something that Tywin doesn't like after that, it's being laughed at. So when he became older, or became a man, he was going to start dealing with things. And the Rains of Castamere refers to one of these incidents, when he decided to deal with the Red Lion of Castamere, the Lord of Castamere, who was a famous warrior and who thought that why should the Lannisters be the most prominent family in the Westerlands? We're lions as well, and that's why we have the song, the lyrics of the song. We're both lions. My claws are as sharp as yours, and red, but I'm red but not golden, but I'm still a lion. And Tywin decided to set out to prove that there was only one lion that really counted in the Westerlands, and he completely annihilated the Rain family at the end of this conflict. And they were not the only Westlands family that were eradicated by Tywin. He also got rid of the Tarbecks of Tarbeck Hall, which also decided to rebel against the Lannisters. And it is said by Lady Genna Lannister that Tywin has only smiled 3 times, and one was when he married his wife and cousin Joanna Lannister. Another was the birth of Jaime and Cersei, but I think it was Jaime that he was smiling the most about. And the 3rd time was when he saw Tarbeck Hall come down on Lady Tarbeck's head. So that's how Tywin deals with those that oppose him, and that's why the Rains of Castamere has become such an iconic song in the setting, really. And I think that shows a little bit of the sort of man that Tywin has ended up becoming. He's definitely not somebody who doesn't take an insult to his house, and he doesn't allow any slight to go unpunished. Another little thing that we thought we'd touch on for the history here is that Davos mentions that the walls of King's Landing have never been breached. Well, this is technically true, but as far as we know, King's Landing has never been under siege before either, so that would have made it very hard to breach the walls. It came close during the first Blackfire Rebellion, when the rebels reached the Redgrass Field, but they never got to the city itself. It is possible that the city was under siege during the Dance of the Dragons, but there's been no mention of it. Now, George did write this episode, so maybe this is hinting at something, but as far as we know, King's Landing has never been under siege before.
So the highs and lows for this episode. This episode is filled with many, many highs. The wildfire explosion is it was so cinematic and amazing. It's sort of almost like a nuclear blast. I think someone on Twitter, and I'll take their word for it, I don't know if they're an expert, they claim that it was along the lines of a 5-kiloton tactical nuclear missile in its effect, except with the green flame. I could well believe it. It was absolutely enormous. From start to finish, it was really a fantastic episode. It had so many wonderful character moments. I was even pretty happy with Nina Headey myself. Linda less so, but she's still restrained. She's still muted. But I guess at this stage, that's what she's playing. So, but at least there was more of the erratic behavior, more of that spitefulness and scornfulness starting to come out in the episode. Braun and the Hound, fantastic stuff. Sophie Turner is really just coming into her own, and it really actually works for this episode to be it, because in the book it's the moment when Cersei storms off and Sansa steps up and calms everyone and sort of settles things, is sort of taking charge. You could see that she is going to be she's going to make a great queen one day, if she ever lives that long. We'll see. Really, I can't. I could just go on and on with the highs. It's a spectacular episode, wonderfully written, wonderfully acted. Let's touch some lows on the other hand. These are very minor lows, but the first up is the Hollywoodization of Stannis, making him the action hero who leads his men to storm the castle, the walls, who climbs on the walls, and basically spends the rest of the episode fighting on the walls. It's not the Stannis of the books. I think it takes away something from the way that the variation in depictions of characters, because Stannis, like Tywin Lannister, is a man who commands from the rear. Not because he's a coward, but because that's where the commander ought to be. He ought to have a great vantage point, and he ought to be directing his men and carefully marshalling his reserves and deciding when to do this and that. He's the grand general looking over the whole field. That's where he ought to be, and that's where Stannis is. Glory, fame, martial prowess, they are only a means to an end, and Stannis doesn't care. It's the right thing to do. It's a just thing to do. I would have preferred, I think, because the other complaint I have, I think, is the denouement is quick. It's very fast. It's very unclear. And I think, had I a say, which I don't, but had I a say, I would have written this episode a bit differently. I would not have had Stannis, leading that charge on the wall and then spending the rest of the time fighting on the wall. Let him be the first man to set foot on the bank. Let him fight and kill some people and tell his banner man to, here, stick the banner here and let's start gathering our forces and being very deliberate about marshalling the forces and sending this unstoppable tide of Baratheon troops charging at the walls while he's commanding it. And then, when Tyrion clears away the battering ram, you can have Stannis be the one who decides at that moment, now this is when the reserve comes in, and that, that the oh fuck me moment from Tyrion could be because Stannis has directly commanded that moment instead he's up on the walls fighting. And then, you could start having more of the denouements explained. You can start having reports of a runner telling Stannis there's something going on over here, some horsemen, and we don't know where they've come from, and you can start having the confusion of that. And then when things start going badly and you see the Renly's ghost, which is Loras Tyrell, and Renly's armor come in, you can have Stannis refusing to flee and shouting at his men to keep fighting, and you could give him that action beat there, that characterization. I think it would have served to expand the denouement a bit, explain a bit more what happened, and it would have made Stannis a character who's a bit more complicated, because you can see a contrast between him and Sansa's description of Robb, always where the fighting is thickest. You can also see the distinction between him and Joffrey, who is not in the fighting because he's too scared. He's a boy, and and he's a craven. Okay, fair enough. I think that was a failure on the part of, partly because I'm pretty sure the producers said, oh no, you have to have this action beat with Stannis. We have to show him in action. It's television. That's how it works. They did this last year with Ned Stark. I didn't really like it then either. Ned Stark is a competent swordsman. He's certainly courageous, but he's not a guy who could have held Jaime Lannister off for that long. One more, and I'm not going to call this a low per se, but it is something that I know a lot of people had issue with. The Hound and Sansa scene. There are certain fans who absolutely adore this implied relationship, and I don't feel very strongly about it, but it is there. It is a thing that actually exists in the books, and that scene is much darker in the novel. It's much richer in sort of an emotional texture, but it's very, very dark. And I think if I had a guess, this is because all along the production seems to have been hesitant to really focus on the Hound's obsession with Sansa, and I think this is largely a modern concern about, pedophilia. So I think that's a big mistake from the production in some ways. I think it does sort of reduce the scale of the Hound's involvement. And I mean, Rory McCann did a fantastic job this episode, but we've not seen him quite as much as we ought to have seen him. I hope that will be addressed in the coming seasons, but as you can see, I mean, these lows are very picayune minor things. It was a fantastic episode.
Thank you for watching this week. This was everything for our video recap and commentary on Blackwater. Join us next week again when we're going to be talking about the final episode, which we believe is going to be an extra long episode. 64 minutes have been mentioned, and it is called Valar Morghulis.